This is Mind Your Job, episode 17 with Sari and Samara. And today we have a special guest,
Welcome.
Eric. He is with Eskow Law and he's going to talk to us about contracting. Right now, you are probably a D4 student and you are probably being contracted by a DSO or a practice of some sort, and you have no idea what you should be asking for in your contract and what you should be taking out of your contract. And so Eric's going to define some of that for us, tell us a little bit more about trends of things that he's seeing, and just keep it legal for us so that we know what we can and cannot ask for. So we're going to have Sam say a little thing, and then we're going to have Eric take it away with some info.
Oh, definitely. So Eric, as we're talking to people, they're in school, they're graduating, it's all about technique, skill, making sure that they can perform the procedures, but then they don't really know a whole lot, I'm assuming, about contracts and what they should be asking for, what is sometimes not on there that you're finding SOP should be on there. And it's a big scary world, and they have families saying, hey, you graduated, go get some money and see what they can get the best deal you can, but what does that mean, and what's fair, what's realistic, and what is, you're shooting too high for day one.
Yeah. Listen, thanks for having me. First off, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you again, Sari, and nice to meet you, Samara, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience. And hopefully after this, you can share my contact information if they have any follow-on questions. Just a short bullet or two on our firm. I'm a partner at Eskow Law. We are based out of Boston. I work remotely out of my home office in Florida, where the weather's always nice. But we are a boutique healthcare transaction firm. So we do anything transactional for healthcare professionals, and that runs the gamut of dentists, vets, med spas, etc. And on the transaction side, it's everything from mergers and acquisitions to DSO formations, partnership buy-ins, buyouts, employment agreements, associate agreements, lease negotiations, etc. So we're very niched, but we're very good in that space. And I think this topic, associate agreements, is one that we see on every deal, whether we're doing a de novo startup or we're doing an acquisition or we're doing a partnership buy-in. There's always a component of employment and what services are provided by an associate, and in exchange, what's the compensation? And then in between those, there's all kinds of other things. There's non-competes, there's health benefits, there are time and vacation days to think about, termination, how do the two parties separate? And we can dive in to any one of those topics. And I'll let you kind of lead the way. You know your audience, and happy to address any topics.
Do you want to talk about Ruth?
Um,
Just give them a little, not just like
Yeah.
what she should have been asking for. Because we have a
Right.
client that
Right.
we're representing right now, and she got a contract and she doesn't like some of the things in the contract. And maybe that would be a really good example of like what you can and can't ask for,
Yeah.
what you should be asking for. Because, a DSO or even a practice, they want to win. It's all about winning, I feel like. And
Yeah.
instead, I always say, like, everyone leaves happy
Yeah.
when we meet in the middle ground and somebody gets something that they really wanted and held sacred, and somebody gets something that they, a time period.
Yeah.
Like, there should just be like a little give and take. And I think talking about like that give and take can be helpful for people because, again, what Sam said is so true. You went to college. The first thing I hear is, I'm in debt. This morning,
Yeah.
my first interview,
Yeah.
I'm in debt up to my eyeballs, Sari. I need to make
Yeah.
as much money as I can. I said, you do need to make as much money as you can, but you also need to keep some level of happiness and peace in your life where you don't hate where you're going to work every day.
Yeah.
Because that's a drag.
Yeah. I think it's important to know your comment about everybody wants to win. I think that's true. There's a lot of people out there with that view. And I wish everybody would come to it with the perspective of we can all win in this. Every contract is an opportunity for everybody to walk away happy. A business relationship, an employment agreement, a buy and sell of a practice should always be win-win. Everybody should be getting what they need out of that relationship and what they want. So if you take that as a starting point, then you whittle away into the middle, and everybody's gonna have to give up a little bit of something, right? So that brings me to kind of my second point, that every contract should be freely negotiated. I would think it's a red flag. It's an indicator. It should raise your spidey senses if the employer is not giving on anything. If they're just rigid and they're like,
Right.
here's the contract, take it or leave it. Okay, maybe you need to do that right out of school until you find something better, right? Don't plan to land there, because that's not the sign of maybe a good partnership and a good employment location. So starting off, I think you any associate needs to look at, what are my expectations as far as hours, days, weeks, time off? What am I expected to do for the employer? And secondly, what in exchange is the employer going to provide me in exchange for those services? And I think everybody should seek counsel, honestly, to find out what's market rates, help them negotiate so that they're not necessarily the bad guy negotiating against a potential employer. Let the lawyers do that kind of work and redlining and revising. That's what we're good at, and we're paid to do that. So don't hesitate to get an attorney. It will pay dividends much longer into the future than you may anticipate.
I mean, one thing I want to say, sort of jump in there and say, is we do a lot of like coaching and counseling of associates.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's definitely, what are you looking for? I mean, because we're so concierge and boutique in what we do with our recruiting, I don't want to be feeling something 6 times, because that doesn't make us look like we did our job. Our job is to find something that sticks, and that both sides again are like happy and feel grateful for the experience of, oh yeah, like, I mean, we know what personality is going to go with what.
Oh, for absolutely. Down to, is this the right city for you? Is this
Right.
the right place for you to be relocating based on what your personal goals are, and in addition to your career goals? I mean, it's not just, here's a job and it's going to pay what, percentage you're looking for. It's more than that.
Are you single? Are you looking for a city with more nightlife?
Right.
Are you
Schools.
are you maybe going to get more education later on? Are you, we really kind of do that little bit of homework of, am I putting you in the right spot? Because we have a reputation, and we do this podcast because we have a platform called metasjobs.com. And Metis also gives, and all these podcasts go on there, Metis also gives you like tips and tricks of, how do you write a resume? How do you do an interview?
Yeah.
How we talk about contracting. Matter of fact, our blog this month is going to be related and tied into this podcast, because we want to find out from you, like, what's ordinary, what's practical, what makes sense, and where are you being like totally crazy off the wall with things that you're asking for.
Yeah.
And like, one of the hot topics right now is non-competes. How enforceable are they?
Yeah, that's a great.
What should we be asking for?
Yeah, that's a great point. I see non-competes in just about every associate agreement, so they're not uncommon. And there's two prongs to each one. There's a geographic radius piece of it, and the second piece is, how long does that non-compete go for? Non-compete laws are different in every state. And I know last year there's a lot of talk about the federal government putting in a rule that was going to do away with non-competes. That fell apart. Nothing came of it. So each state has its individual non-compete requirements. The general rule, though, is that they have to be reasonable in both geographic radius and in duration. So I think in associate agreements, a general rule of thumb that I would go by is a reasonable distance, and this will vary based on whether you're in a rural or urban area, what's the population density? In New York City, they do these by blocks, and most other places they do them by miles. But
Right.
generally speaking, you should expect anywhere from 3 to 7 miles. So I like to start with 5 as a starting point. And then 1 or 2 years is very normal. 2 years is very normal from the time that the employment stops. And then you kind of go back from there.
Okay.
So if you're an associate and you see a 25-mile radius or a 35-mile radius, you should scratch your head and say, well, where is that? If you're in Miami, 25 miles puts you on the other side of the state, right? Or it puts you a 3-hour drive
Oh,
away.
sure.
So you really have to
Right.
think about how far, if this employee-employer relationship doesn't work out, how far am I going to have to drive to get my next job? Or am I going to have to move to get my next job? And those are
Well,
important
and
questions.
right, and Eric, you used the word reasonable, and that can be subjective.
Very much
So
so.
does that get kind of,
Yeah. And most
yeah,
state statutes will put in there the time period and say, hey, we'll determine as a starting point 2 years is reasonable, but they're often quiet and they're silent on the geographic radius. So it becomes a, if this goes to court, what do we think we can improve? What does case law say is enforceable? So again, it's all situational based, and we can help people work through those issues, and I'm sure you can as well.
what are, just for an anecdote, what is a request that you had a candidate have that was completely bonkers where you said, this is just not something we're going to ask for?
Wow, from an associate to an ask from the I think vacation time is a big one that we see. The
Okay,
employee
sure.
the employers want to have you there chair side and maximize that
Mhm.
time, and they want to minimize your time off. So I've seen some people come in, new associates, they're wanting 60 days off in a year. And for a new associate, that's not practical. You'll have people that will give 2 weeks, things of that nature. But that's always a tough ask when you're new to an employer.
I feel like a month is good. It's like once a quarter. You want people to refresh.
Yeah.
Dentistry isn't the easiest on your body, your back, your
Yeah.
hands and stuff. You need them to sort of like,
Yeah.
you know, power it down. I don't think if you asked for 4 weeks that anybody should say no. You are considered a professional. That would be like a reasonable amount of time to start with.
And remember
But
too,
the
remember too that it's usually not paid time off, because usually associates are paid on a
Right,
percentage of either
right,
production or collections. So if they're not working for that 30 days, they're not getting paid, right? So it really doesn't cost
right.
the employer much. Sure, they have to find somebody else to replace that person, but they'll ideally be producing and can get paid off of that. So you just have to, a good lawyer should be able to articulate that on behalf of the associate.
And if I was the associate, I would go back and look at their annual revenue and find out what their weakest weeks are and have those be my weeks I take off so that my loss isn't as big year over year. Like
Yeah.
I always think of September just happens to be a month that a lot of dentists take a week off, especially older dentists that don't have kids in school. And you would be amazed to know that statistically September is one of the worst months in dentistry.
Yeah, exactly.
It just is. I think throughout healthcare it is.
Yeah.
Because people are getting kids back to school, they're getting their life together, but they're not running. One of those things is not running to work as fast as they
Yeah.
can. They're kind of like, yay, my child, took my entire summer away, and now I have like 5 minutes to take care of me and me time. But I have an interesting question. I'm hearing a lot about non-solicitation of employees, non-solicitation of patients. Are you seeing a lot of that in contracting?
Yes. Those usually are subcategories right below the non-compete. So there'll be a non-competition, non-solicitation of employees and patients, and then a non-disparagement clause. And those are all, they're designed to protect the business that the employer has built and established. And it's interesting. It's really hard, even on the non-compete, to have those discussions about reducing them, trimming them, cutting them back, because you're almost telling the employer, hey, I'm not really committed. I may be leaving here in a couple of years and I want to be able to set up shop not too far away. So it's a delicate conversation to enter into with the employer on trimming any of those back. They need to be reasonable. They should be expected. Um, but it can be a sensitive discussion, right?
Right.
Right.
Yesterday, when Sari and I were talking to this one particular candidate, she used I don't want to call it a technique, but she had said something that I thought was really important, which was looking at this contract and what they're offering, pick your two non-negotiables because you're going to have to give something.
Yeah.
So what are you willing to go to bat for that you absolutely can't live with or without? Because you are not going to get everything and they are not going to get everything. So I thought that was a really good piece of advice for somebody who's new to it. Is just
Yeah.
you're not going to get it all. So
I've been doing this for a while.
I think another area that associates should focus on are the benefits that tag along with compensation. So are they going to have to pay for their own malpractice, or is that something the practice will reimburse? What about their CE credits in time off for CE? Is that something that the practice will reimburse? They should. Licensure and DEA licenses. I would get as much of those expenses and burdens pushed off onto the employer as possible if I were arguing on behalf of the associate, right? Obviously, because that can get expensive, and it can offset their compensation or their base.
Are you seeing a lot about 1099 versus W-2 too?
Yeah, man, everybody wants to be a 1099, right? The associate wants to be a 1099, the employer wants to hire a 1099. They both make out a little bit better financially, but I'll tell you from a legal perspective, the IRS has a balancing test. There's 7 factors or so, and there's not a set formula, but they balance all these factors. And it really comes down, and the factors all help them make a decision whether somebody's an independent contractor or a W-2 employee. The factors all circle around control. The more control the employer has over the individual, the more they look like, walk like, and smell like an employee. The less control they have, the more they appear to be a 1099 independent contractor. Generally speaking, an associate working Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday as at a general dentist is going to be an employee and not an independent contractor, because the employer is telling them where to work, what time to work, when they can take time off, what tools to use, what patients to see, maybe what labs and supplies to use. So that's all heavy control. An example of an independent contractor may be somebody who goes into a general dentistry once a week to do surgeries or orthodontics, and then they have different days at different locations, and they bring their own orthodontic supplies or their own anesthesiologist or whatever it may be. Then there's less control that the general dentist is exerting over them.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a tough question we get all the time, right? And our advice usually falls after we look at all the facts and the analysis. It usually says, hey, you're a W-2 employee.
What do you see besides income also as a means to make money besides a sign-on bonus? Like, are you seeing people being able to participate in retirement? Are you seeing people being able to get bonuses with the rest of the staff? What
Yeah.
are you seeing in terms of raw compensation?
Yeah, we like to see a lot of the base compensation which will be either production or collections, and then some sort of incentive, right? To get that doctor performing above what the employer expects, right? If he produces above, they should both win. He or she produces above, they should both win. And there's lots of different ways to do that. You can do it as a straight bonus. You could do it as a phantom equity, which would be essentially to say, hey, we're going to take 5% of the pool of profits of the company, and distribute it like they were a shareholder, but they're really not, and just take that 5% and put it out across the doctors and the rest of the staff. You could, if an associate's been there for a while and it's a good fit, there could be an opportunity for them to buy in or receive actual equity in the company. So now they're really financially incentivized to help grow the business. Um, if you're a limited liability company, there's a nuanced type of equity that they could do, which is profits interest, which could be real equity. It could be a different class of equity in the limited liability company that's just financial only. So lots of different ways, but I think it should circle around incentivizing growth and incentivizing going above and beyond the base expectation.
I've seen a couple contracts ever over the 20 years float past my desk that are like 35, 40, where up to $100,000 in production, you're making it at 35%.
Yeah.
Over $100,000 in production, you're making 40. Are you seeing a lot of that?
I've seen
Does
it.
it still
I've seen it
exist?
occasionally. I think why I haven't seen it
Okay.
more is the accounting and the bookkeeping and the payroll starts to get
It's a nightmare.
complicated, right? And it's like it
Totally.
sounds great in theory, but implementing it is like the bookkeepers start pulling their hair out, and HR is, throwing things at the wall.
Right. All right. Well, tell us anything else that you've seen or that you think we should let the people that would watch this podcast know
Yeah.
about their
I think
contracting.
the last
Because
the last big thing to think about in an associate agreement is what is the exit strategy. So there's going to be termination provisions, and those will either be for cause or without cause. And who has that right? Is it just a unilateral, the employer can terminate the employee with or without cause? Can the employee terminate for any reason, or do they have to have a good reason to? So those four prongs you really need to look at. And it's typical for the employer to have a shorter notice period. So maybe they could terminate an employee on 60 or 90 days notice. And the employee, if there's a termination provision for them, they need to give 120 or 180 days. It's normal to have those different time periods just because it takes longer for the employer to find a replacement associate and they need to plan for that. But I would look at, if I were an associate, what's the exit? What are the termination provisions for this agreement? And are they relatively balanced? You don't necessarily want an associate to be locked up on a 5-year employment agreement with no way out of that. And then the employee or the employer, sorry, they can terminate with no with no notice or no reason, and it's very lopsided.
That's a really good tip.
I mean, one of my things when we're hiring people is I would never sign a contract more than 18 months.
Yeah.
I think at 18 months, you kind of get the milk spoils. And I also see, and Sam can say this, is we see a lot of doctors looking prior to their time period of their sign-on bonus.
Right.
So they're looking at 9 months, which always leads me to something about companies is why are you not serving the doctors? Why do you want to keep rehiring people? Why don't you want to figure out what the it factor is that's going to keep that person longer than a year? Because every month longer than a year is $30,000 you're saving as a company, having to reload,
Yeah.
reteach, and sort of bring someone into your practice. Do you see stuff like that?
Yeah.
Are you seeing that?
I'm a fan of, on a completely new associate agreement, maybe a 1 or 2 year initial term so that there's time to ramp the associate up, get them comfortable with, not being a student and being an employee and a true dentist. And then after that initial period, they automatically renew for successive 1 year periods. That way, it's not too long of a runway that both parties feel like they're locked into a bad relationship. It's a year. And anything can change in a year, and then we just give notice of, hey, I'm going to move on to another place, or I'm going to open my own practice, and then you have that. But you have certainty for that year period.
What happens if, for example, I give you a contract and the contract says you're going to have mentorship, you're going to get CEs internally, you're going to get all these things, and the company fails to perform. What kind of recourse does that associate have
Yeah.
to the company for missteps like that?
So I would take that agreement and define some of those as a material issue, right? And now it's a breach of the company to provide a material part of their agreement. That could then turn into a termination reason without notice for the employee. So at least the employee says, "Hey, you haven't done X, Y, and Z. Maybe I've given you notice and I brought it to your attention. You haven't cured it. You haven't fixed it within a certain amount of time. Now I'm going to give my 30 days notice and I'm leaving." Right? That's usually the remedy for something like that.
Interesting.
We love that.
Yeah.
Very mindful.
Yeah.
Mind your job.
Mind your job.